Greetings, fam. I could not do a video on coons without doing a video on black superheroes. And that's what today's presentation is about. There are a lot of under-acknowledged black superheroes who are presently living and many of whom have passed on. And I think it's important, not just for the youth of today, but for everyone to know who these people are and who they were, because this is an important part of our history, especially as black people, but also for other races who are in the dark about, for lack of a better description, about who we are. Many cultures don't even know that we played a significant part in their culture. So I'm going to just go through the clips now and show you some of these people, and many of them you have not heard of. So you'll be pretty surprised when you see the list, because I'm sure a lot of these instances of great contributions by black people were omitted in the history books. And this is why, for those of you who question why there is a Black History Month, it's because a lot of our history has been omitted. So if we don't bring it to the light, who else will? It's just like there are museums of people's cultures. There's a Jewish museum, there's the Spanish museum. You know, there are actual edifices that have been created in order to acknowledge a certain culture. So there is definitely nothing wrong or inappropriate or even racial about black people, us, wanting to acknowledge our culture. Let's start it off with the Queen. Queen Kahina, she died in 705 AD, and she is known for fighting against the Arab incursion in North Africa. This is something history has managed to hide, but yours truly managed to find it. The African Moors, who conquered Spain and ruled it for 700 years prior to Christopher Columbus's trip to the New World. They were responsible for bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages. So they contribute a lot to European culture, but there's also quite a few other Africans who contributed to European culture. In particular is King Caspar, a descendant of the Moors. He was the Black King of Germany. And I could be a little bit off on the dates because I found different instances of the dates that he ruled, but according to the most accurate source I could find, he ruled from 1626 to 1690. Then, who could forget Equiano? He was a freed African slave who wrote the first known slave narrative, and he became a famous proponent of British abolitionism, and he worked with William Wilberforce. Now, William Wilberforce is credited with being, and the credit is due, he contributed a lot to the abolition of slavery in Britain. However, what wasn't well advertised was the contribution of this brother, Equiano, and he was only known by the one name at the time. Here's a pretty interesting story. Many of you who enjoy comic books may know this, but others who are not fans of comics may not know this. Matt Baker is often considered the first known successful African American artist in the comic book industry. He began his art career in 1944. He joined the SM Igor Studio as a background artist. Now, the Igor Studio was a comics packager which produced ready-to-print feature material for comic book publishers. Baker's first assignment was to work as a penciler and the inker on the 12-page Sheena, Queen of the Jungle story in Fiction House's Jumbo Comics number 69. In the comic book industry, a penciler provides a rough draft of the visual view of the storyline, and he provides a layout of the scenes. For those of you who are in the film industry, this will be very clear to you. The scenes were drawn in pencil because they would go through several drafts after being presented to the editor, and a master drawing. He was a master, Miss Matt Baker. He was a master drawer of the female form. He paid attention to the smaller details that allowed his comic book heroines to come alive as a more robust character. He began working for St. John Publications in 1948, and he became the company's lead artist. He penciled the groundbreaking picture novel, It Rhymes with Lust, in 1950, which many consider the earliest form of the modern graphic novel. He also produced Flamingo from 1952 to 1954 as a syndicated comic strip for the Phoenix Features, and his first assignment in December 1955 was working on a 5-page anthological story titled Showdown at Sunup in Gunsmoke. And this was the Western Comics edition number 32. And by the way, all of these comics today would fetch millions of dollars. For those of you who are looking for a hustle, get your comic book hustle on, because old comics, they even have conventions where you can bring them and sell them and trade them and so forth. And nevertheless, Baker penciled and inked alongside a script which was authored by comic book legend Stan Lee. He would continue drawing Westerns during this period, drawing from Atlas Western Outlaws, Quick Trigger Action, Frontier Western, and Wild Western. And he even extended his work to the realm of science fiction anthologies such as Strange Tales, World of Fantasy, Tales to Astonish, I Fell to the Center of the Earth, which is issue number 2 of March 1959. And Baker's last confirmed work was on a 6-page story entitled I Gave Up the Man I Love, and that was in the Atlas Marvel's My Own Romance edition number 73, which was published in January 1960. Now, as a side note, because of the era in which Matt Baker lived and he, he did his work, a lot of his work went unacknowledged. He was not credited. He created the characters, he penciled them, but the credit went to the person who added the color, and in the final editions, a lot of the credit was left off of him. And this was due to the racial climate of the 60s, in which Black people were just not acknowledged for their work. A lot of people give Tiger Woods credit as being the first Black professional golfer, this generation. But there were actually a few before him. And the very first was Charlie Luther Siford, who was born on June 2nd, 1922 in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was the son of a factory worker, and as a youth, he worked as a caddy at the Carolina Country Club in Charlotte. In 1948, Siford sought to compete as a professional, but with the existing social norms, he was not allowed to play against white competitors and was instead relegated to competing against other blacks. Now, the United Golf Association, which is the UGA, it was created by a group of Black professional golfers, and Siford was its most prolific champion. He won the Open 5 years in a row, and Siford, he was not the first Black golfer to seek an opportunity to compete against white players. There were players like Ted Rhodes and Bill Spiller, who led the fight for years against the Professional Golfers Association, which is the PGA, and they had a Caucasian-only clause which denied them the opportunity to participate in PGA tournaments. Golf's highest professional level, that's what the PGA was and still is. However, in 1952, Siford was able to play in the Phoenix Open in an all-black foursome that included former boxing champion Joe Louis. Unfortunately, when the four men reached the first hole, they found it filled with doo-doo. How nasty is that? This is the kind of racial climate that America the Beautiful comes from, where there was such ugliness during this era towards black people and efforts to keep us out of things. And I believe a lot of it was based on fear, because here you've got this guy who is a heck of a golfer, and people see this, he's winning all over town, and so there was that fear that, oh, he's going to outshine us. We can't let some, and this was the term that was used back then, we can't let some nigger come in here and take over golf. Well, Charlie he finally got his props in 1957 when he competed in the Long Beach Open, and it was a tournament that sported many of the top PGA stars, the very ones who didn't want to play with him. And surprising everybody, Siford won the tournament by one stroke in a playoff, and he received a winner's check for $11,500. Now, in 1961, having finally been admitted as a member of the PGA Tour, Siford faced the top players in the sport, including Ben Hogan, Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, Sam Snead, and Jack Nicklaus. He was invited to play in the Greater Greensboro Open in North Carolina soon afterwards. Willie O'Ree is honored by many as the Jackie Robinson of hockey, as many black historians and people who follow black history know. Jackie Robinson is said to be responsible, and rightfully so, for integrating baseball. Well, Willie O'Ree was the first black hockey player in the league's history. His efforts to change the culture of the game spanned many decades beyond his playing days, because in 1956 he turned pro and signed with the Boston Bruins minor league affiliate, which was the Quebec Aces, and he signed a $3,500 contract with a signing bonus of $500. O'Ree scored 22 goals with 12 assists in his first season with the Aces and went on to win the Quebec Hockey League championship of that year. While Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier led to hundreds of black players entering Major League Baseball over the next decade, no other black players made it to the National Hockey League for another 26 years. It wasn't until Mike Marson was drafted by the Washington Capitals in 1974 that another black was admitted. It took that long for the Hockey League to admit another black player. But it should be noted that although O'Ree broke the black color barrier in the NHL, Larry Kwong, who was a Canadian of Chinese descent, played one game for the New York Rangers in 1948. So the racism wasn't exclusive to blacks. Every culture had racism at one point or another directed at them. And the fact that they let the Asian player play one game is, signifies that, this was not exclusive to just barring African Americans or people of African descent. Now, O'Ree's impact on the NHL would not be limited to just his playing days, however. In 1998, the National Hockey League finally approached him about becoming the director of the NHL USA Hockey Diversity Task Force, which is a nonprofit program aimed at increasing minority participation in youth hockey. So there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It just took almost 100 years to happen, but it happened. Okay, Lewis Latimer is considered one of the 10 most important black inventors of all time, not only for the sheer number of inventions that he produced and the patents that he secured. Now, let me just pause for a minute. This is what I try to tell this generation over and over again. Handle your business. It's one thing to have a talent for something. It's another thing to know how to handle your business, because no one is going to care whether or not you handle your business. If it doesn't benefit them, they don't care. Lewis Latimer, who was born September 4th, 1848 in Chelsea, Massachusetts, his mother and father were Rebecca and George Latimer, and they were both runaway slaves. In 1974, along with W.C. Brown, Latimer co-invented an improvement of a train water closet. Now, this was the precursor to what is now the train bathrooms that you see, the toilets, on all these trains, Amtrak, all of these trains that have bathroom facilities, have lavatories. This is the brother who created it. And it was at the time called a train water closet, but it was a bathroom compartment for trains. So every time you're on a train somewhere, whether it's the Long Island Railroad or wherever, and you go to use the bathroom, while you're sitting there, if you don't have anything to read, think about this brother who created it. Okay, and this was in the 1800s. In 1876, Latimer was sought out as a draftsman by an instructor for the hard of hearing children. The teacher had created a device and needed Lewis to draft the drawing necessary for a patent application. Again, handling your business. This brother knew how to make the drawings necessary to get a patent application. The instructor who had required his services was none other than Alexander Graham Bell, who is responsible for creating the telephone. And the product that Latimer drew the sketches for the patent was indeed the telephone. He worked late into the evening, and he labored hard to complete the patent application, which was submitted on February 14th, 1876, just hours prior to another application which was handed in by Elisha Gray for a similar device. Now, in 1880, after relocating to Bridgeport, Connecticut, Latimer was employed as the assistant manager and draftsman for the U.S. Electric Lighting Company, which was owned by Hiram Maxim. And you can Google all this stuff after you look at the video and see, and just cross-check my information, because I get accused of lying and making up stuff. Oh boy. Okay, so Maxim was the chief competitor to Thomas Edison, who was the man who invented the electric light bulb. Now, Edison's light had been composed of a glass bulb which surrounded a carbon wire filament, typically made of bamboo, paper, or thread. When the filament was burned inside of the light bulb, which contained almost no air, it grew so hot that it literally glowed. And Latimer, this brother, he set out to make a longer lasting light bulb, and one that was not as hazardous, because obviously if this thing was so hot that it started to glow, it eventually burst, and that's what happened in the beginning with this creation. So Latimer developed a way of encasing the filament within a cardboard envelope, which prevented the carbon from breaking up and therefore provided a much longer life to the light bulb. This made the light bulb less expensive and more efficient. This also made it possible for electrical lighting to be installed within homes and all through the streets. Latimer's capabilities in electric lighting became well known, and soon he was sought after to continue to improve on incandescent lighting as well as arc lighting. So Thomas Edison may have created and invented the light bulb, but it was this black man who perfected it. Latimer he eventually went to more key cities and began wiring their roadways for electric lighting. So all these street lamps that you see are also attributed to this brother. And he helped install the first electric plants in Philadelphia, New York City, and Montreal. He oversaw the installation of lighting in the railroad stations, government buildings, and major thoroughfares in Canada, New England, and London. In 1890, this is when this brother was active. Latimer was employed by Thomas Edison, began working in the legal department of the Edison Electric Light Company, which is today known as Con Edison, and he was serving as the chief draftsman and patent specialist. He continued to display his innovative abilities over subsequent years, and in 1894 he also created a safety elevator, which was a vast improvement on the existing elevators. So this was the type of brother who he could look at something and he could think of ways to make it better. He also obtained the patent. All of his inventions he obtained a patent for. And this is what I'm saying, young people and old people know how to handle your business. It's one thing to sit in the crib and have all these great ideas, but protect those ideas before you go showing off. Look what I did, look what I made. Make sure you got the patent on it. Okay, one of his other inventions, which is still in use today, was the locking rack, which was a type of hat rack, coat, and umbrella rack that was used in restaurants, resorts, and office buildings. And it was the type of thing that if you hung your coat or whatever, it had a lock so that, one, it didn't fall off, and two, it couldn't be taken by mistake, supposedly. Okay, this device was used in restaurants, resorts, and in office buildings. Throughout the rest of his life, Latimer continued to try to develop ways of enhancing everyday living for the public. Ultimately, he worked on initiatives to improve the civil rights of black citizens within the United States. He was also a portrait painter, a poet, and a musician. He died on December 11, 1928. There were others before this sister, but there were none that crossed over into the mainstream prior to her. In the 1950s, Helen Williams became the first black female fashion model to do just that. She was born in East Riverton, New Jersey in 1937, and she was obsessed with clothes from an early age and began sewing her own garments at the age of 7. As a teenager, she studied dance, drama, and art before getting a job as a stylist at a New York photography studio. While she was there, she spotted and they spotted her on several occasions, Lena Horne and Sammy Davis Jr., who happened to be in the studio doing press shots. Struck by her beauty, they urged her to take up fashion modeling, and she was only 17 at the time. However, the climate in America, and Lena Horne could very well attest to this because she too experienced the racial prejudice of the early 1960s. And so Helen Williams was told she was too black for fashion. Now, this was a sister, although in some of the photographs she appears to be lighter, but this was a dark-skinned sister who extremely beautiful. And with her trademark bouffant wig, sculpted eyebrows, and a long, elegant neck, she worked exclusively at the time for African American magazines such as Ebony and Jet. But that was in America, and that's where she was limited. But in France, the French, by contrast, held a very different view of black beauty. And by 1960, Williams had moved to Paris. And I'm going to quote her. She said, "Over there, I was la belle américaine." She said proudly. She modeled in the famous ateliers of fashion designers Christian Dior and Jean Dessaix. By the end of her tenure, she was making a staggering $7,500 a year working part-time. Now, this is the 60s, so that was considered a great deal of money to be working part-time. After Paris, Williams returned to America, where things had not changed for dark-skinned African-American models. She was undeterred, and she took her case to the press. There were two very influential white journalists at the time, Dorothy Kilgallen and Earl Wilson, both of who took up her cause, drawing attention to the fact that, black models were being excluded in the fashion industry. And as a result, she was booked for a flurry of ad brands, such as Budweiser's, Loomtogs, Modest, and you can see some of her ads here in the photo. And she crossed over for the first time into the mainstream press because these ads appeared in magazines that never had black people in them, unless it was in the process of committing some crime. New York Times, Life, and Redbook. By 1961, her rate had shot up to $100 an hour, which was considered a lot at that time for both white and black models. And so the borders had finally been breached. And after that came many others. Another model who deserves to be acknowledged is Thelma Porter, and she actually came before Miss Williams. She preceded Helen Williams, but not so much in print. She was the first black Miss Subways. Now, I remember this as a child. The New York City Transit Authority used to have these beauty contests where they would feature women as Miss Subways. And the premise was that these were women who rode the subway back and forth to their jobs, and they were considered beautiful, and so they were given the title of Miss Subways. Thelma was the first woman to integrate this beauty contest and became the first African American Miss Subways. Actress Gail Fisher was the first African American actress to win an Emmy for outstanding performance in a dramatic series, and this was in 1970. Nichelle Nichols, who was born Grace Dell Nichols on December 28, 1932, is an American actress and singer. She sang with Duke Ellington and Lionel Hampton before turning into acting. Her most famous role is that of communications officer Lieutenant Uhura aboard the USS Enterprise in the popular Star Trek television series, which ran from 1966 to 1969. And she also appeared in the succeeding motion pictures where her character was eventually promoted in Starfleet to the rank of commander. She was one of the first African American female characters on American television that was not portrayed as a servant, and it was groundbreaking in the United States at the time. Civil rights leader Martin Luther King personally praised her work on the show, and he asked her to remain when she had considered leaving the series. Gashawo, during 1826 and 1884, he was a king who fought the British in the Anglo-Zulu Wars, and he was also the last independent monarch of the Zulu nation. According to Marcus Garvey, if we are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, because whilst others might free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. Mind is your only ruler, sovereign. The man who is not able to develop and use his mind is bound to be the slave to the other man who uses his mind. because man is related to man under all circumstances, for good or ill. And that was from a speech that Marcus Garvey made in Melanic Hall in Sydney, Nova Scotia in 1937. I cannot stress enough, young people, that you're the real heroes. You're the superheroes, and your weapon is your mind. If you can remember that, there is nothing you cannot do. And this is why it's so important to preserve your mind and to protect your mind from things that are not going to help you at all. Molly is not going to help you achieve anything. It's not going to help you become great. No substance, no drug is going to give you anything that you don't already have in terms of your mind. We are perfectly created in the eyes of God. He has given us each abilities and gifts. It is up to us to use them. Speaking of education, Lucy Craft Laney, she was born in April 13th, 1854, and she was an early African American educator who was the first to establish a school for African American children in Augusta, Georgia. She was born in Macon, Georgia, to former slaves, and although it was illegal for blacks to read at the time of her birth, she was taught by the slave owner's sister, and by 1869 she was enrolled in Atlanta University. Enrollment in her first school in Macon was only 6, but by 1928 it had grown to over 800 students. Camilla Ella Williams was the first African American to receive a contract with a major American opera company. Mersey Tate was a professor, scholar, and an expert on United States diplomacy. She was the first African American graduate of Western Michigan Teachers College, the first African American woman to attend the University of Oxford, the first African American woman to earn a PhD in government and international relations from Harvard University, which was at the time Radcliffe College, as well as one of the first 2 female members to join the Department of History at Howard University. What an achievement. Okay, here's a sister who actually did not contribute to her fame by anything she did. She was just born this way. Born in South Carolina, October of 1865, Ella Grigsby Williams, she narrowly missed being born a slave, as the 134th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and I could have that wrong, was ratified only 10 months earlier, previous. So slavery was abolished when she was born. But Ella Williams, who preferred to be called by her showbiz name, Madam Obama, was once the world's tallest, hot and beautiful lady in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And she was reported to be 7'6". Now, look at her. Her body is slamming, but she's obviously pretty tall. In her own words, Madam Obama says, "I was born near Cross Hill in Lorain County. None of my sisters or brothers are unusually large. For years, every time a showman saw me, he would want me to sign a contract. But I never could make up my mind to leave Columbia. Finally, in the fall of 1896, while I was cooking for a prominent family in Columbia, manager F.C. Bostock got me to sign up for a tour. Ella came to work," and end quote, Ella came to work for Elihu and Harriet Williams as a teenager. And because Grigsby was the family name of her parents' slaveholders, Ella took the Williams surname as her own. So this is what happened a lot back then, is that when servants worked within a household, this was a holdover from slavery, they would adopt the surname of the family that they were with. So if you were with the Grigsbys, then you became a Grigsby. But if you were bought by the Williams, then you became a Williams, and so on and so forth. I remember one time when I was younger, I thought I was being clever. I met a lady named Scott. Actually, her name was Margot Scott, and I was working at Atlantic Records, and she was the attorney for Atlantic at the time. And when I met her and we found out we were both Scots, she was like, oh, maybe we're related. And so me, not really being versed in etiquette at the time, said, yeah, your family probably owned mine. She didn't find that very funny, but I did. Anyway, moving on. The tour that Bostock signed Ella up for was a tour of the British Isles. Now, Bostock understood that Ella's act would not go over well here in America because at the time there was another Ella Ewing, who was a white giant from Missouri, and she was touring. So they didn't want to have the conflict between the giants. And also racism in Europe was not as pronounced in the U.S. And so Miss Williams was ultimately to find great success on foreign soil. And I just want to say, as a side note too, is that this has long been the case. Europe has, for a very long time, not engaged in the prejudices of the United States towards black people. During the time when Josephine Baker in the 20s, she became a great big star over there in Paris, France, because the Europeans loved her. They didn't, now not all of them, but for the most part in Europe, the Europeans don't see color. They see talent. They love black talent. They think it's magnifique. And so, you would think the Americans would learn something from that, but they didn't. And they still haven't, and we're still working on them. Okay, so I'm going to wind this up. I hope it's enlightened some of you who may not have known. And I'm going to wind it up with a quote from Harriet Tubman. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars and to change the world. Young people, can you hear me now? I'm going to end with prayer like I always do. Lord, in the name of Jesus, I thank you for those who have graced this earth and those who continue to grace this earth and make our people proud. Help the young people to see there is so much more out there than basketball, entertainment, drug dealing. These are not the things that we should be aspiring to. We want to aspire to the gifts that you have given us and to use them wisely. Everyone is not meant to play ball. Everyone's not meant to make records. We all have our individual gifts, Lord. Help the young people to see what theirs is. There can never be too many doctors. There can never be too many lawyers. There can never be too many good inventions. Lord, help them to see what they're holding within that they should bring about. And this will lead them to the life they desire. Help them to also see that as well. As always, I thank you for the subscribers. I thank you for those who just check in. And I thank you for the blessing it is to be able to do these videos. I thank you and I bless you in Jesus' mighty name. Greetings, fam. I could not do a video on coons without doing a video on black superheroes. And that's what today's presentation is about. There are a lot of under-acknowledged black superheroes who are presently living and many of whom have passed on. And